Hello. I am so glad you're here. As additional people wander in, let's welcome them and make room for them. Good evening, and welcome to the 26th Annual Environment Across Boundaries Symposium. There we go. My name is Jessica Kleiss, and I'm a faculty member of the Environmental Studies program here at Lewis and Clark College. I have had the joy and privilege of working with 3 wonderful student co-chairs and a small army of student volunteers and coordinators to develop and conduct this week of symposium activities. I'll introduce our student co-chairs soon, but before we dive in too deep to our topic of discussion tonight, I want to first and foremost deeply thank our administrative specialist, Laura Munt, who has supported us throughout this process and helped to bring each event, including this one, from an idea to reality. I also want to thank faculty members, Andy Bernstein, Marianne Bylander, Jennifer Hubbard, Bob Goldman, Chris Hutchings, Liz Safran, Elizabeth Bennett, Jim Proctor, and Kara Tomlinson, who hail from many departments on campus and who have all consulted with us or collaborated with us as we have tried to unravel the intertwined mess of market economies, resources, government, labor, equity, and waste as we have explored this symposium theme. We are so grateful to be in such a generous and thoughtful community of scholars and friends. Last night, we kicked Symposium off with a game. Students, community members, and faculty members took on the role of energy industries and traded carbon offsets in a dynamic market. The exercise begged the central question: can a market be designed to serve as a solution to the climate problem that it largely created? Tonight's keynote event will explore the challenges and opportunities of the private and public spheres. How can we re-examine the roles of markets and public services to solve environmental problems? So that leads us to the plan for tonight. Following these introductions, each of our 2 keynote speakers will give a brief presentation to share their experiences, knowledge, and perspectives with you. I then will kick off a brief conversation with them, followed with plenty of time for questions from you. So be ready with your questions. After this event concludes at 8:30, you are all invited to continue the discussion in the lobby outside with some refreshments. And students, you are invited to have a drop-in Q&A lunch with the keynotes tomorrow right here in the Fowler Center, room 350, from 11:30 to 12:30, in case your mind is exploding with ideas and questions that you would like to continue talking about. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dean Bruce Suttmeyer for some introductory remarks.
Thank you. Hi there. My name is Bruce Suttmeyer. I teach in the World Languages Department, and I serve as Dean of the College. Let me echo again all of the people who have done an enormous amount of work to put this event together, starting with Jessica herself. I work with Jessica on numerous committees and lots of doing the work of the college. And I'm always amazed that she is also doing things like this, putting together such a complex and wonderful event for the college. So a huge thank you to Jessica for all her work in putting this together tonight. And also a huge thanks to Laura, who, boy, behind the scenes is just doing an incredible amount of work and doing it really, really well. So her and Kaylee and Grace and Julia, the co-chairs, thank you for all the work in putting this great event together. Thank you. The Environmental Studies Symposium is really special in a lot of ways, certainly for how it sets as one of its goals the speaking across difference, and then asks the same of us, asking us to think across differences of race, of geography, of place, of all the kinds of boundaries, communication boundaries, geographic boundaries. And this year in particular, to engaging with the challenges of life within capitalism. I remember very vividly 2018, the keynote, Daryl Davis gave a really remarkable talk where here he is, an African-American man, speaking with and working with members of the Ku Klux Klan. And I was just amazed at both the creativity that brought him here and saw what he can bring thinking about climate change, thinking about speaking across difference, and his story about how you engage with people who are so different from you and think so differently from you was, to me, really revelatory. And I still remember really vividly that talk. This year, certainly, the topic of life within capitalism is important and necessary and equally challenging about how market-driven ideas, how capitalism itself might be brought to bear on some of the solutions for climate change. And a huge thanks to Yuko Aoyama and Clarence Edwards for coming to campus, for spending time with us tonight and for the next couple days. I'm really excited for the talk. I'm excited for the entire week. I'm intrigued by what card game Carbon Sims and carbon trading was last night. I'm sorry I missed that for another event, but there's a lot going on until Thursday, and I encourage you to take advantage of it. This is really one of the gems of Lewis and Clark, and thank you to all of you who are part of it, and on with the show. Thank you.
Alrighty, if you are a student and you have helped to plan or coordinate or contribute to this symposium, could you please stand now? Thank you. Thank you all so much. And in particular, we have 3 student co-chairs who I would like to introduce now, and that is Kaylee Hauser, Grace Blunk, and Julia Einaudi. Come on up.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. All of this could not have gone on without Laura and Jessica, so we want to give them another round of applause and show our token of our gratitude. So thank you for all that you have done and helping us get here. We really appreciate it.
We would now like to begin our exploration of capitalism by acknowledging the people who lived here for millennia before this land was colonized. We are able to meet here tonight because we live on stolen land. Multnomah County rests on the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River.
Our discussion here tonight about capital-driven economies and the Earth systems would be incomplete without the inclusion of other ways to value goods and live in this place, such as local indigenous knowledge. Embodying centuries of wisdom, resilience, and sustainability, indigenous knowledge offers the ability to give us more insight into how to take care of these ecosystems. We want to honor the role that indigenous knowledge has played throughout the entire history of land stewardship and societal structures, as so much of our knowledge is based upon the ways of indigenous thinking. There are many ways for us to begin to pay tribute to the injustices that have been inflicted upon indigenous groups and start making meaningful change throughout our communities.
When you all entered, you received a piece of paper with a QR code that directs you to a list of resources. The variety of sources includes information on the history of local indigenous tribes in the Portland region, readings on the topic of capitalism from Native perspectives, and information about local Native-owned businesses. Making an effort to educate ourselves is an important first step, and we encourage you all to seek a better understanding of history from the perspective of our Native community members and support Indigenous communities of Multnomah County. Now I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker of the night, Mr. Clarence Edwards. Mr. Edwards is the executive director of the Washington, D.C. office of E3G, an independent climate change think tank tackling the barriers and advancing solutions to a safe climate. Mr. Edwards' experience varies from inside and outside government in U.S. foreign policy, international development, policy, government relations, issue advocacy, and strategic communications. He has also worked to inform and catalyze sustainable energy and environmental policy solutions on both a global and national scale. Through lobbying efforts and as a congressional appropriations liaison for the Department of Energy. Mr. Edwards is committed to communicating science and climate solutions to policymakers and the public. I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Edwards last fall through Global PDX, an Oregon-based community working to incite positive change around the globe on an event to discuss climate disruptors. It is our honor to welcome Mr. Edwards as one of this year's keynote speakers.
So I've reached that part of my life where I'm Mr. Edwards. I keep thinking that. I'm like, that's my dad. But thank you very much. Thank you, Grace, Julia, Kaylee, Jessica, Laura, and the Environmental Studies program for having me here at Lewis and Clark this evening for this symposium to talk to you about issues that really lie at the center of the challenges that we face in the U.S. and around the world. My name is Clarence Edwards. As you've heard, I'm the executive director of an organization called E3G, Third Generation Environmentalism. My organization works around the world to put climate-positive policies at the center of national and international politics. As you heard, my background includes 30 years of working as an advocate and strategic advisor in Washington, D.C., and includes serving as a climate lobbyist for the Quaker Church, advocating for global health policies on behalf of Bono and the Gates Foundation, and serving as an advisor to the Australian government. This symposium, Life Within Capitalism, Reconsidering Market Consequences and the Earth System, is such an intense title, and it's really at the heart of, as I said, what we're wrestling with these days. This symposium is taking place at a critical moment when world events, the poly crisis, is challenging our country and our world, pushing issues to the forefront, and putting before us questions about how our societies are organized, whether our system is equipped to respond to climate change and the wider interconnected challenges that face us. We are living within capitalism right now, and I would argue, I'm going to make the argument, that capitalism is I have down here the best tool. It may not be the best tool, but it is the tool that we have right now to respond to the climate crisis. It's what we have. It provides the motivation and the tools needed to formulate a response to climate change that matches the challenge that climate change poses. I believe, however, that the type of capitalism you practice matters. At this event, the program overview states capitalism is not singular nor well-defined. It expresses differently in different places, times, and communities. In the United States, capitalism, unfortunately, is expressing as rapacious and unsustainable laissez-faire capitalism. Our capitalist economy, which developed at the same time as the Industrial Revolution, has long been described as winner take all. And while that has undeniably led to impressive innovation, immense wealth, and global power for the United States, it has also resulted in significant disparities. It allows those who succeed to reap the benefits, but those who cannot succeed end up finding their way, trying to find their way, trying to not fall between the cracks, sometimes with little hope of emerging. I was reading a column from 2019 by New York Times columnist Matthew Desmond, who put it this way: low-road capitalism, he called it. In a capitalist society that goes low, wages are depressed as businesses compete over the price, not the quality, of goods. So-called unskilled workers are typically incentivized through punishment, not promotions. Inequality reigns and poverty spreads. In the United States, the richest 1% of Americans owns 40% of the country's wealth, while a larger share of working-age people, 18 to 65, live in poverty. A larger share live in poverty than in any other nation belonging to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I think that we've seen over the past few years in particular that capitalism is not fit for purpose in responding to climate change. It demonstrates its lack of suitability in the pollution that impacts marginalized communities in areas like North and Northeast Portland, which is home to over 500 waste sites that contribute to land, water, and air pollution. It demonstrates its inadequacy in the amount of CO2 emissions, methane flaring, NOx, nitrogen oxide, and SOx, sulfuric oxide emissions from waste incinerators that contribute to air pollution. But capitalism as a concept is not inherently flawed. Rather, it is the manner in which it is practiced in the United States that determines its impact. You know, you can go around the world and you can see many different types of capitalist societies, ranging from liberating to exploitative, productive to abusive, democratic to unregulated. Consider Australia, who I used to work for, Canada, and the Scandinavian countries. The approach to capitalism in these countries is not devoid of competition or innovation, but they also cushion their society with robust social safety nets that ensure that even those facing setbacks have a means to get back on their feet. Their version of capitalism acknowledges the truth that a society's strength is not just in its brightest stars, but also in its ability to uplift those who have fallen. The question then becomes, how can we improve our approach in the United States, make the changes that we need to make to ensure that the capitalist system responds to climate change and works not just for the 1%, but works for all of us? I think that in the recent US government response to climate change, you can see the seeds of a different approach to capitalism, one that can harness the excesses of capitalism, rechannel its power, and save capitalism from its own rapacious appetite. I said to lunch today with some of your colleagues that this is how I see it. Capitalism is eating itself right now. And we have to, all of us that care, step in and change the system, because capitalism eating itself is capitalism eating our lives, your life and my life. But I think that what we saw with, for example, the Green New Deal proposal, the Biden administration's Build Back Better initiative, which then became the Inflation Reduction Act, passed just about a year ago. I, along with many others, from activists in the streets to clean tech entrepreneurs in the suites, lobbied for initiatives under these pieces of legislation that really try to begin going at the heart of this rapacious system that we have, trying to blunt the edges of it, and trying to shift it in a direction where we can really start using it to address the climate crisis. So how do we do that? Or what does that bill contain? tax incentives to encourage investments in solar, wind, geothermal energy sources, tax incentives for clean manufacturing for electric vehicles, and for funding to address the legacy of environmental injustice that afflicts marginalized communities across the United States. In my role on the board of the Pricing Carbon Initiative, I did a lot of lobbying to try to get a carbon, we call it a carbon fee and dividend. We'll put a tax on carbon and direct those resources to marginalized communities. I wasn't successful in doing that. We're going to try again, or my colleagues and I are going to try again. I have down here supporting bipartisan efforts in Congress, and I wanted to make the point that Congress is indeed a clown show. I'm up there all the time as part of the clowns, or as a spectator in the clown show. But useful stuff does actually happen on Capitol Hill. I also wanted to add that your senator here, Senator Ron Wyden, is one of the leading champions and proponents for the tax incentives for clean energy, and also as a supporter of carbon pricing. So both of your senators here, Senator Merkley and Senator Wyden, are real big champions and supporters of these initiatives. These are the kind of initiatives and policies, along with regulations around banking and insurance. This is how you start changing the drive that is within the capitalist system in the US. This is how you start turning that in a direction where it can stop abusing the planet, where it stops incentivizing abuse of the planet, and starts incentivizing clean energy. I'll also add that part of addressing our current crisis is by pursuing a care economy that features a permanent child tax credit, similar to what the Biden administration enacted during the COVID pandemic. We can't address the climate crisis just by having tax incentives and encouraging manufacturing. That's good, but this crisis is interconnected, and we need to take care of each other, and we need to make it easier for people to care for their families, to care for the elderly, for the loved ones. That's a real part of, once again, blunting the impact of the vulture, rapacious capitalism that we are participating in this country. And we'll have to keep doing these things, because as the world changes and as the economy changes and as capitalism changes and technology and innovation comes about, we're going to need to explore initiatives like universal basic income and other things that can help make this society a little bit less brutal on people. My point is that we can explore these options, and we don't have to accept the robber baron influenced capitalism that we find ourselves living in today. This is changeable. This is, the capitalist system we have is not gravity. It has changed in the past. It was a system that relied on slavery for many years. It was a system that relied on immigrant labor for many years without any recourse. It has changed, and we can change it. It must evolve to fit with the times and respond to the crisis and injustice that it has actually helped to foment. And we must all play a role in making sure that it does so. A true and sustainable capitalism understands that long-term prosperity is built not just on profits, but on people. It invests in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. It understands that the health and well-being of its citizens is paramount to a flourishing economy and society. The climate crisis is an urgent challenge, one that our current capitalist system is quite ill-equipped to tackle. However, the climate crisis offers an opportunity to reimagine how we do things and how we live our lives. By integrating environmental considerations and care into our capitalist economic model, we can transition to sustainable industries, invest in green technologies, and create jobs that not only sustain families, but also protect the planet. Capitalism has the potential to be a powerful force for good, but only if we take the reins and direct it with intention and care. We can encourage businesses to adopt practices that prioritize sustainability over short-term gains. We can incentivize green innovation and hold companies accountable for their environmental impact. By doing so, we can shape a capitalism that rises to the challenge of climate change, ensuring a better future for generations to come. In conclusion, the type of capitalism we choose to practice is a reflection of our values as a society. It is a statement about who we are and what we stand for. So let's strive for a capitalism that recognizes the dignity of every individual, that understands the urgency of our environmental challenges, and that works for the betterment of all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clarence. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Yuko Aoyama, one of our keynote speakers. Professor Aoyama is an economic industrial geographer with expertise in globalization, technological innovation, cultural economy, and I already said that, industrial organization. Her research focuses on the way that global capitalisms function and maintain economic distinctiveness throughout geographically various regions, such as the US, Spain, Japan, and India. On top of this, Professor Aoyama is a professor at Clark University, including courses on globalization and economic geography. Throughout our planning of symposium, we really wanted to emphasize the importance of maintaining a wide lens in order to reflect the idea that to begin to understand things or attempt to understand things, we must reflect upon other people, places, and systems. We were particularly drawn to Professor Aoyama's ability to illuminate connections and complexities about global capitalisms, economies, and the social implications of these systems. This is particularly evident in her new book, The Rise of the Hybrid Domain, Collaborative Governments for Social Innovation. Let's all have a big round of applause for Professor Aoyama for being here today.
Thank you. Good evening, Lewis and Clark. How are you all doing? Good, good. So I come from Clark University, from the East Coast. And I see there are a lot of commonalities and similarities between our students at Clark and you guys at Lewis and Clark. So very much looking forward to the conversation, exchanges. Do come and ask questions tomorrow. Not too intimidating, as you can see, I'm pretty short. And I'm also a previous international student. I came to California, I think it was 1982. Oh, maybe I'm not projecting very well. Is that better? Yeah, okay. So I came to California as an international student. Well, actually, I wasn't all alone. I was with my father in 1982, spent 10 years in California before I moved out to Georgia, and then 23 years now in the West Coast. So I became the East Coast, so I became a East Coaster at this point. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Grace, Julia, and Kaylee for the invitation. And thank you, Jessica, Laura, and Bruce for hosting us. I actually do have a PowerPoint here, but this is closed, so I don't know whether it's still alive. Oh, yes, it is. So let me see if I could get to the PowerPoint, and I promise I won't go too long because it's in the evening. Let's see if I could make it happen. Yeah, okay. So, you won't be able to imagine how intimidated I was when I got this invitation to talk about capitalism to a room full of environmentalists, right? Then I said, oh my God, what am I supposed to say? Well, I study capitalism. I also know, and particularly in your generation, that, and we see in the media all over the place, capitalism is broken, right? You've seen that article. When they say that, what they really mean by that is that capitalist system, as we have constructed it, as a form of governance, is not delivering what the society expects that it should. And I understand this sentiment. For one, clearly, it shows that the institutional regime that was created essentially in the immediate post-World War II period, 80 years ago, is aging. And we need a new mechanism. And at the time, we probably didn't quite have the globalized economic system that we have now. Especially, this is confounding and problematic, challenging to conceptualize as a geographer because, number one, the picture is very complicated. From where I stand, however, capitalism is place-specific and variable, and yet it is combined with the fact that the problems today require global coordination across multiple capitalisms. So as an economic geographer, and also somebody who lived in 4 different parts of the world by the time I was age 24, 25, that was Japan, Malaysia, France, and the United States, my primary interest has always been in understanding capitalism and its variety. And when I started this project on India, and you are seeing the word blurb that I created, that is compiling interviews of multiple stakeholders over social innovation in India. Social innovation, by the way, refers to a new set of products or services or systems that are designed to solve social problems, whether through something like an affordable medical equipment that costs 1/10 of what you normally buy here, a medical equipment that is battery operated, for example, so you don't have to rely on the wire, remote medicine, communication building among villagers, or worker empowerment, any sort of social innovation that is taking place in India. And here is what I've arrived at after doing that research. I think ultimately, this is the question we're trying to answer. When we say that the capitalist system is broken, can the current economic system provide what we consider as global public goods? And I include things like public health, not just your individual health, but public health and at the global scale. I consider that as one of the public goods. As an experience with COVID has made it clear, delivering good public health for a very small number of people in rich countries would do nothing to prevent global pandemics. With globalization and accelerated mobility of people, health officials as well as researchers are predicting increasing instances of global pandemics going on from here onwards. So COVID is not going to be the only one. Another global public good that I would consider is climate. This requires international coordination. And then thirdly, I would also include alleviating global poverty. And obviously, poverty interacts with health and climate in complex ways. So these 3 examples show that the current governance system is woefully inadequate and that we need a new system of governance. And conceptually, public goods being rescaled at the level of the global poses a number of problems. The Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom's common property resources, you probably learned in one of the environmental studies class, and her conceptualization of polycentric governance didn't quite make it to the scale of the global. And in fact, she presupposed a territorial boundary, a confined territorial boundary to a problem. And also, she relied heavily on the assumption that you could develop consensus. Many political scientists and economists alike have said that we have a globally integrated economy, but we don't have global governance. And most people do not believe that global government is possible. So the debate over capitalism is closely associated with the debate on governance. Now, I would characterize capitalism as a highly useful conceptual device to understand a set of core mechanisms of a market economy. But after all, capitalism is a conceptual vehicle, which I believe became somewhat misunderstood. Now, I'm not here to defend capitalism, but I do think it is important to understand that institutionally, it is far from monolithic, it is variable, it is socially constructed, and socially embedded to a society or various sets of society. So as an academic, I'm not as useful as action planners, and Clarence is doing a wonderful job working with the government in Washington and various other stakeholders. I try and think in terms of trying to deliver some sort of a conceptual solution. And one of the things that have frustrated me most in looking at the literature on governance and capitalism is the lack of bridging the ideological gap between, on the one hand, state-centric, and on the other hand, market-centric solutions. And what we see instead is a dichotomization of visions over governance between that's controlled by the market exclusively on the one hand, and then that's one that's controlled by the state on the other, with each demonizing the other over the course of the 20th century, essentially. And that's what you see in the literature. In the evolution of capitalism, what we observe is a series of gray zones in reality, on the ground, in practice, and places in between. So my work on India, for example, really began with an observation whereby multinationals, the big guys, big firms, evil large firms, right, and teeny grassroots NGOs working together to develop solutions for the poor. Now, they are understood to be strange bedfellows, antagonistic stakeholders with adversarial relationships. So why and how, in some instances, cooperation and collaboration is possible? Now, these sorts of collaborations are actually immediately seen skeptically by ideological camps on both sides because they're inconvenient examples. But shutting down that kind of exploration, to me, is potentially missing out on new possibilities that may be emerging. So if we're truly looking for alternatives to the current system, we should pay attention to even the smallest of possibilities. Our observation has led to this schema, which I'm going to walk through to you, with you, where we see what used to be conceptually separate economic and social missions represented by separate institutions became blended to produce new mechanisms. So social missions were taken care of by nonprofit, that includes the state, economic by the for-profit, private firms, and so on. And there was a gradations between the social and economic, but there was no dialogue between the social and economic conceptually. But now we see new entities like leveraged NGOs and social enterprises, as opposed to purely commercial enterprises. And in terms of finances, the social missions were covered by the state, as opposed to economic missions covered by conventional finance. But we have foundations now emerging. We have impact investment emerging, and there are these gray zones in between the social and an economic, and the public and the private. And this I'm calling swelling of the middle, or the rise of the hybrid domain. And we see this public domain and private domain, local and global, as a continuum, whereby certain actions can be both economically and socially viable. And these are the stakeholders. It is not going to be just corporations, just nonprofits, just the state. Finance is absolutely important, and the regulations in ensuring these entities. And in fact, if I tell you the truth, we interviewed an NGO, or we thought that this person was an NGO. We went for an interview to ask what kind of social innovation this, it was a female-headed NGO in India, in Bangalore. And we sat down, we said, thank you very much for taking our interview and volunteering to participate in this research. And she said, actually, I'm not an NGO anymore, is that okay? And I said, oh, what are you? She said, well, I've incorporated, we became a social enterprise. So we have an economic profit motive, but then we have social missions. Our clientele is exactly the same, our goals are exactly the same, what we cater to is exactly the same, but now we are a private corporation. And I thought, oh my God, this is so interesting. And then I had a huge debate with my collaborator about whether to include that person in the sample or not, because it was originally outside our sample. But anyway, we have in the United States a number of legal and not so legal, sort of practice-based ways in which that these corporations with social missions can exist. And it's, as you can see, relatively new. They're called benefit corporations. And they are those firms that support mission-oriented, but for-profit companies. And so this is a new legal framework that is, again, relatively recent, and they are just emerging. And this gives us an interesting possibility that is, you call it capitalism? Yes, but with a greater social mission. So this is one example. Now, there are possibilities for failures. And in fact, we need to acknowledge three kinds of failures. Excuse me. We need to acknowledge three kinds of failures. If you're an economist, you're aware of instances of market failing, right? Market failure being monopolistic and oligopolistic competition, number one. Public goods, number two. Public goods are the kind of goods that are undeliverable by the market forces, and externalities. And for those of you who study environmental studies, I mean, that should be sort of in the backhand. I mean, in some ways, polluter pays principle was developed with the concept of externalities. Externalities is things like pollution that's considered negative externalities that companies don't have to pay for unless there's a regulation to make you pay for it. So these are the three known instances of market failure. On the first, did you know that almost over 60% of your coffee comes from two companies in the United States right now, Dunkin' and Starbucks? So that's quite something. Did you know that almost 60% of your cars come from 4 companies? So we're talking about a significant instance of monopolistic and oligopolistic relationship whereby those companies are no longer price takers. If you don't have price takers in the market, then you have an inefficient and ineffective market. So these are price setters technically, I mean, of course, 60% of the market, so it's not 80%, 90%, but they get to set prices on you rather than supply and demand setting prices on you. This is how capitalism works, that there's a tendency toward greater and greater monopolistic power. And from time to time, the United States government intervenes through antitrust regulations. But if you study the antitrust regulation over the course of 120 years or so, it comes and wanes, and so on. And it depends on what the politics is doing right now, economics is doing right now. It changes its course in terms of its enforcement. Of course, antitrust is also difficult because you're pounding on what you consider to be the most successful firms. I mean, you know that they've gone after Microsoft, Facebook, Google, right? So it's a tough proposition, but it creates inefficiency in the market. There is also, however, government failure, which is, and I'm not talking about the failed state necessarily, the states that are unable to govern, but the states, a broader definition of state failure is when the state is unable to deliver services and goods that we need as a society. The third instance of failure is the double failure. Neither the state nor the markets are able to cope, deliver services or goods to the society. So in some instances and in some products, some markets, some services, we are dealing with the instance of neither the market nor the state working properly. And this is a dire situation, but this is the complexity of life that we live in right now. So what this tells us is that there's an innovation of the institutional arena, institutional innovation that is necessary, that involves an increasing blending of social and economic missions. Now, let me backtrack and take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the variations in capitalism and break it down to pieces very briefly, because without that basic understanding of the variety of capitalism, we may miss seeing the value in trying to modify capitalism. This is, however, admittedly a bit of a dry subject, so I apologize in advance, but I'll try to be as succinct as possible. Let's see. So it can be said that any economy today has three elements: characteristic ownership, price controls, and regulation, the regulatory controls. And in the crudest of terms, the definition of capitalism is a kind of system in which property and means of production is basically your factories, your stores. Property and means of production are owned by the capitalists. Conversely, socialism is a system in which that property and means of production are owned by the state. Socialism is originally designed as an intermediate stage to ultimately arrive at communism, whereby property and means of production are owned by the people or workers. So this was at least the 19th century Western conceptualization. But of course, the complication today is that capitalists and workers are no longer mutually exclusive categories, but they're blended categories. Are you a capitalist? Do you know if you're a capitalist? Well, you are part of the capitalist system, so by the virtue of it, maybe you have to be capitalist. But are you an equity owner? If you have a savings account in your bank, that means that you're actually providing money to the market system to be invested elsewhere. So if you have $20 in your account, $200, $20,000, that is being reinvested. So credit, the presence of credit, is an important concept of capitalism. And if you have a savings account, then you are part of being a capitalist. If you're lucky enough to have a retirement account, maybe you don't yet, but maybe your parents do, your family does, then you own stocks, essentially, by the virtue of it. Then you have equity. If you have equity, then you're a capitalist. And of course, you may not live on, many of us are not in the genteel class, so I'm by definition capitalist by that definition, but I work for a living. So I'm not in the leisure class capitalist. I actually have to earn wages to be able to make a living. So that's what I mean by the blended categories being the workers and the capitalists. Okay, the variety of literatures exist on the nature of state interventions in the economy. The United States is considered a regulatory state in which the primary function of the government is to regulate the economy to ensure the capitalist system functions most efficiently. The developmental state over here, by contrast, points to Asian economies, such as Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, whereby the state employs industrial policy, sometimes against market signals, this is important, to develop a particular set of industries, such as steel, shipbuilding, automobiles, electronics, to achieve national strategic developmental goals. The priority is export-led industrialization, above all else, and is achieved with very close government-industry coordinations. Entrepreneurial state is a new take on the state, pointing out that although innovation is attributed primarily to the private sector, so it's the firms that innovate, some states drive innovation through state mechanisms. US, in the case of the US, is the Department of Defense. We all know where the internet came from, right? So we have well-known models of primarily Scandinavian welfare states, and finally we have state capitalism, which is how the state drives economic development with strong role of state enterprises, and right now this is most attributed to the Chinese system. So we have all this variety, and this variety essentially comes from state interventions. To what extent the state engages with the economy. Every state does engage with the economy in today's terms, although the US is considered to be kind of on the far end, closer to laissez-faire capitalism. It is not entirely laissez-faire, and actually none of the countries, none of the economies are entirely laissez-faire today. So in the purest technical sense of the term, the laissez-faire pure capitalism doesn't exist. Capitalism really exists today in conjunction with the state. Another conjunction is, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna skip this, oops. Sorry. I'm going the wrong way. How do I go there? Here. Another reason why it varies has to do with all these things. One of the things that, I'm sorry, I'm looking at one slide above, and it goes the wrong way, sorry. Here. So, as I said, state has a huge role in shaping capitalism. Another one is society. And society and state work in conjunction to shape the economy and shape capitalism. And how do they do that? There are all these varieties across different countries. State-industrial relations, some of them are very close, some of them are very arm's length, some of them collaborate with each other, some of them don't. Finance is a really, really important category, what is and who is financing your startup? In this country, it's the banks, venture capitalists. Venture capital is very active in the United States, not so active in other countries. Entrepreneurship, US is a high birth, high death economy when it comes to entrepreneurship. Japan, for example, is a low birth, low death economy, so there's a lot less of a churn in firms giving birth and firms dying. And the US, again, is high birth, high death. Immigration is another very important factor. Education, triple helix is what's been talked about, the relationship between the university, the industry, and the government. And this triple helix is really the arena in which the people are being trained. This is really important for the labor force. Trade policy, social compact, and culture. All these things shape the society itself, shape capitalism. Okay, so let me try and conclude and talk about the fixity and fluidity of capitalism. They are, well, unfortunately, the bad news is that I don't think that there is a clean, single, quick, magic bullet. We all wish it does exist, but I don't think it exists to fix the current system of governance. What we can hope for, however, is an effective gradual change, systemic change. Effective gradual systemic change, however, cannot just be coming from the state. It needs to come from social acceptance. After all, you're all voters, and you vote for certain initiatives, certain orientations, and we need to, as voters, make our voice count to ensure that the society is moving in the directions. I do believe that comparative capitalism analysis is really useful to learn from the pitfalls, the success, as well as failures of others. Unfortunately, not all systems, because systems are unique and they are socially embedded, what works in one country does not always work in another. We have issues of fixity because capitalism is embedded in a society and there are significant social networks behind it. That makes capitalism or particular form of governance sticky, and inertia tends to take over. There's also path dependence. Once you create a particular institution, and that could be laws, legal frameworks, or code of conduct, or norms, culture, things tend to persist. And many of you know this QWERTY system, right? The typewriter sequence. Why are we stuck with that particular sequence of typewriting? It's because we had this previous technology, right? The hands go up and type the system, and it's supposed to slow you down so that those arms don't jam with each other. But now, we don't have that system, but we're still stuck with it. And in fact, early on, there was this whole typing school that existed to, teach people how to type QWERTY. And now, 70 years later, 120 years later, it's very difficult to dislodge a practice that has emerged at a particular point of time. So QWERTY system and path dependence is always used as an example in which that institutional change is very difficult. And as a geographer, I need to point out the last piece, which is the spatial fix. The capitalist or economy tends to solve its problems spatially, such as offshoring. So when certain economic systems is inadequate, then they tend to pick up and leave. Some of these factories tend to be footloose, and they could relocate to a lower country where lower wages exist or lower regulatory frameworks exist. The same thing for finance, tax havens. Tax havens are typically in islands somewhere in which that they have created a mechanism to attract a significant amount of capital. So that is a way in which that those capitalist system and money credit can flee from one place. So the capitalist system is not, on the one hand, territorialized, but can be deterritorialized. I can't even say the word. Okay, so this is, I'm going to conclude by saying, complex systems such as capitalism require complex solutions. As I said, there's no single magic bullet, and what we need is a careful operations of multiple levers. It's a little bit like running a university. Multiple levers that hopefully gradually shift the course of an economy and society. I believe, well, first of all, I acknowledge and I'm aware of a generational pessimism. But the only way to move forward is active experimentation. Criticizing capitalism is one avenue of a call for systemic change. And what I urge you to do is to unpack capitalism as you know it, which aspects are your top priority, and think about how we can move forward making a change. The path I have chosen is education. For you, it may be different, but whatever you do, think of a gap, mind the gap, and think about how you can bridge, serve as a bridge to that gap, whether concretely or conceptually. Thank you.
Well, let's the three of us come on up here. Oh, great. I'll sit right here. And I bet as soon as I turn this one on, we're going to get some reverb. There we go. And we'll practice shared. We'll practice a shared economy of 3 speakers and 2 mics, just to demonstrate. I am going to try to keep my question very short because I would love to get the audience to dig in with questions. So I have one word that's exploding in my mind between both of your speeches, and that is change. And Clarence, I see you as someone who's in the trenches as a change maker, lobbying government, lobbying senators, thinking of change and doing change. And Yuko, I see you as someone who has an incredible perspective across a vast range of scales, across different systems and societies. So I want to ask you, Yuko, if we crudely say Clarence is a doer of change, what would you ask of him or suggest to him in terms of your expansive perspective? You're sitting right here next to somebody who does things, which I'm an academic, I admire this. What would you ask or request or suggest or how would you engage given your perspective?
Well, thank you for that great question, but it gives me a great opportunity to pose my wish list, perhaps, a series of wish lists that I would like the world to see. But this is difficult. We want all countries to get along and develop consensus. How do you develop consensus? I know this is difficult, but that's really at stake. How can we all agree that climate change is important? It's our top priority. We need to fix it together. I saw this cartoon on social media that is looking at sort of two islands on planet Earth saying, you know, us, them. And then it sort of zooms out into this tiny planet that we coexist. But consensus building is incredibly difficult. And that's why we cannot, most of the theoreticians don't believe that we can have a world government. World government is difficult, but how do we build consensus? I think that's really the most important.
Wow, yeah. You know, there is a lot more consensus, I think, globally than you would believe from watching from the United States. I have colleagues in London who are preparing for the UN Climate Change Conference. It's coming up late November in Dubai, or Abu Dhabi, one of those. It's in the Middle East. There's a lot of consensus around the world that this climate is a problem that we need to address, and that we need to, I don't want to say get serious about it, but really start prioritizing it. The devil is in the details. There's a lot of back and forth between the quote-unquote global north, Western industrialized nations, and the global south. There's an issue called loss and damage, where developing countries really want the industrialized nations, the United States, Canada, Europe, other nations, to really pay their fair share. And so I think that there's a lot of consensus that climate is a major crisis. We need to address it. But it's a real challenge. I mean, even with that consensus, nations don't necessarily want to give up their advantages. They don't want to, the US government frankly doesn't want to be on the hook for paying to help developing countries respond to the climate crisis. The US and industrialized nations made a pledge years ago, I think it was like 2015 or so, $100 billion a year to help developing countries respond to climate change. And the global north and the US and other countries have not fulfilled that pledge. So it's a long way of saying I think that the will is there, the commitment is there, the details, it gets really hard. And you're also dealing with politicians. Right? You know, we all love politicians, but their vision isn't necessarily like, oh, we need to do this to address the climate crisis. That might be the third thing they think, but the first one is like, if I do X, it's going to get me like pushed out of office. So you have, in addition to various forms of capitalism, you have nationalism, you have responding to voters, you have crises like we've seen, sadly, in the past couple of weeks, places like the Middle East, but crises that have also been going on around the world. So it's variable geometry, it's a lot of politics, and I know this is not an answer, but your question's really hard. Yeah, so I think that the commitment is there, but it's the day-to-day grind of, I mean, I literally get emails and colleagues are enumerating some of the challenges around getting an agreement on phasing out coal. You know, people are talking about phasing, at least making a commitment to phase out fossil fuels. So once again, I think the commitment is there, but it's also, I don't want to sound trite about it, but this problem is enormous. When you talk about having to replace all of the built environment on planet Earth, I mean, how do you even start to do that? But I think that there is a good start. And I'm optimistic because you do see the end of coal coming. You see way down the horizon, you could see a world where we're going to be moving away from fossil fuels. And so yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question, but yeah.
All right, I would love to turn it over to our audience. There you go.
Thanks, Morgan. Okay, so I'm wondering what you guys think of, Yuko, you're talking about like thinking about filling a gap, whether that's whether you're doing that in a conceptual or a concrete way. So I think a big thing as a student is deciding which route you want to go in what you're interested in. And I think that really stresses me out a lot, and it also feels like as a young person right now that there's like no more time to be conceptual because of the climate crisis. And I don't think that that's true, but it feels like it is. And yeah, what do you guys think about how to kind of choose which route you're going on in your own life and your own work?
Who's starting?
Yes, maybe there's no more time for conceptual. But what I meant by conceptual is that there are different ways to contribute. And you all like different things, and you all are variably talented. You know what you're good at. You know what you don't like to do. So all I'm saying is that ensure what keeps you at night, which may be climate change. Ensure that you're taking a part. This means that you could go work for a nonprofit. This means, actually, quite importantly, you may work for a corporation. Particularly right now, there is a lot of ESG compliance officer that companies need. Companies need to clean up their act, and they need somebody to help them do that. And that's an absolutely vital work. So, don't think private sector is evil. I'm not going to join them. And in fact, it is absolutely important that climate change sentiments and priorities are reflected in the private sector. Conceptual, I meant, what I've chosen to do is to educate and talk to people. And that's how I try and do my part. I actually feel guilty that I haven't done my part, so I need to replace my gas furnace. But it's a systemic change because I have a radiator, blah, blah, blah. And, electric vehicle I should have, but it's very expensive, and I should have a solar panel on the top. So it's a very difficult investment for a household to make that commitment, right? You need to have money right now, and you shouldn't have to do that. I mean, everybody should be able to afford new technologies, but that is still a little ways out. I mean, for my electric vehicle, I'm trying to wait a few years. I have a Civic that I drive from 2011, and I hope I have a few years out until we have a better model, maybe better technology, better batteries, more efficient, and so on and so forth. But every decision you make, whether you are thinking about your future, you're thinking about your consumption pattern, which is really big in environmental work, makes a difference. And I do know, I mean, if I were to give you a little bit of career advice, my piece of advice is the first job is the first job is the first job. Any experience is a good experience, because at least you will, it's also, getting to a career is a process of elimination. I didn't like that. That's one thing off your plate. And that's a really productive, important step forward. So just experiment, do anything, and you can really plan yourself 2-3 years at a time. I mean, you can't have a 15-year plan. You can't do that. That's not how young people work. I wasn't like that. I couldn't make a 15-year commitment to something. I hope that helped.
I used to have a 5-year plan when I started my career. It lasted about 6 months or so because things change. I mean, and that was back in the 80s. I will say that this is one of the most exciting times, I think. There's a lot of trepidation and worry, but also there's so much opportunity emerging. We're in a fourth industrial revolution, and we're at the start of it. And there's pushback, but there is also a growing realization in this country that we need to change things. And there's also a growing realization that we need every voice, all different skills and talents. So, you know, and frankly, I'll say, we need people coming out of colleges like Lewis and Clark. We need younger people and fresh ideas. Lord knows in heaven, Washington needs fresh ideas, you know? Washington, D.C. Washington State's doing fine. But, well, you know, but we need fresh ideas. And I'm trying to avoid saying follow your passion, because that sounds whatever. But I followed my passion. And I'm doing exactly what I wanted to do in my career. There's no danger in that. Try things out. You know, my nephew is 23 years old, and he's into welding. He lives in Portland. He's into welding. I'm like, get into it. Get your certificate. Get your license or whatever you need. All this infrastructure that we have to build, it's not going to be me welding it. I don't know anything. I'd blow myself up with a welding torch. But I'm like, you know, we need solar panels. We need windmills. We need EV factories. There's going to be tremendous opportunity out there. So, and there's a tremendous need for fresh blood, fresh ideas. So think about what you are really good at, lean into it, and don't be intimidated. Yeah.
This question is for Clarence. How do you rhetorically approach lobbying towards politicians? Like, what do you tell someone if you want to further an environmental policy?
Great question. I try to find commonalities. You know, I talk to people on the Hill or lobby foreign governments. I don't lobby foreign governments. I don't lobby anymore in case my boss is listening. We don't lobby in my new role. I don't lobby, but as a lobbyist previously and as an advocate, my approach has always been to find what is it that you have in common with the person as a human being. You know, not the issue is one thing, but also, and I learned this from working with the Quakers. I went to a Quaker school for prep school, and I ended up working with the Quakers from 2020 to 2020. The years are all merged together these days, 2022 or so. And we would talk about, and I'm not a Quaker, but I learned a lot from being in that community, remembering that everyone has an inner light. You know, everyone is, at the end of the day, not Democrats and Republicans, but human beings, and finding that commonality. And then on the issue, really two things. Really being a strong advocate for what you want to see. When I was lobbying on clean energy tax incentives, it was like highlighting what are the benefits, what are the savings, what is something that will benefit that member of Congress's community directly. You know, members of Congress like it when you talk about the number of jobs that are going to get created in their district. They really like that. You know, giving them something tangible. So really finding that commonality in terms of them as human beings, and also finding that issue commonality, finding something that ties an issue to a particular district. If I'm talking to Senator Wyden's office, you know, it's about what could benefit Portland, or what resonates with people in Oregon that could resonate with the senator. So really just finding those areas of commonality, both issue-wise and remembering that you're talking to another human being, not just a senator or a member of Congress or whatever. And the last point I'll add is that listening is one of the most important things you can do as a lobbyist, is not just go into an office and say, this is what I want from you, but listen to where the person, your interlocutor, is coming from, really hearing what their concerns and interests are. And through listening, you can really gain a lot. So that's, if I had to answer this again, I would start out with listening. That's the most important part of being a lobbyist to me.
Thank you both for talking today. Dr. Aoyama, this is a question for you. You said in your presentation that the current international economy was kind of created after 1945, and I wanted to ask your opinion on whether our current economy, like our current form of capitalism, has the possibility to change itself without such a terrible shock that occurred in the 20th century?
That's a very good question. I think it has to. Now, at what price is really what you're asking, because every state has an interest to pursue the status quo, because that is the most comfortable. Stability in international relations is comfortable. But over many years, I think there is an institutional fatigue. And everyone recognizes that. If you think about how much it has changed over the last 80 years, we have essentially the end of colonialism, although some people claim that there's a neo-colonialism and post-colonialism, and colonial relationships per se haven't dissipated. So that is a legacy that carries on. The trading relationships that the British Commonwealth and so on had still continues. But supposedly end of colonialism, establishment of a number of international institutions, UN, UNEP, UNDP, the World Bank, IMF, GATT, now the WTO, you name it, right? And increasingly, from economic perspective, the policy was to pursue greater globalization because free trade was supposedly beneficial for all. That was the perception. Now, that is under question because globalization does impact people in varying ways, and particularly in the United States, we see evidence in which the top 1% is the greatest beneficiary. And if you look at the who benefits most from trade, over the last 20 years, there's very little that goes to the bottom 50%. Now that gets reflected in what Clarence was talking about, tendency toward nationalism. You saw Brexit. We see the polarization in this country, and that has not exclusively, but a lot to do with the winners and losers of globalization. In my book, the definition of globalization is that territorial boundaries no longer protect you. You are faced with global competition. So you have to fit into how your particular position, occupation, expertise fit into the global market. And increasingly, you don't really see the shelter of the nation. But that's why that some people would like to see the reversal of globalization. And increasingly, people are talking about deglobalization to protect the people in their own territory. To what extent that is going to be successful or not is we shall wait to see. I mean, we don't know. But we have seen that globalization was also believed to have provided international peace, because if you are economically dependent on each other, then you're less likely to go to war. Now, Germany depended significantly on Russian natural gas, and that has created a scare among international community, because now we realize that interdependence can also be weaponized on both sides. So we are coming to a completely different political environment. We also have completely different globalized environment. So, for example, the United States is trying to decouple from China on semiconductor chips. And actually trying to bring in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan into the sphere. Now, those three countries are completely, essentially, in the Chinese sphere of economic influence, but under the US military umbrella. So those three countries, they have the Chip 4 alliance, which is led by the United States. They are trying to devise a kind of globalization that benefit that team and not the other team. So we're beginning to see a not maybe a disintegration yet, but skepticism toward globalization. That means that the system that has worked is reaching its limits. Now, we don't know what tomorrow brings, what the next mechanism institution will look like. But I think what is clear is that we do need to, there are a number of things like that that are making all of us reconsider what is the appropriate international relations. So what are the next framework of international relations might be in the future? I'm sorry, I'm not really answering your question.
Thank you for your comments and your talks. I appreciated all of it. I'm going to push back a little bit. It seems to me that everything you're calling for is about using government to recalibrate capital. The assumption has been that capital is the chief driver of climate change-related phenomena. I'm not quite sure I believe that rational planning at the governmental level, for reasons that Mr. Edwards has sort of acknowledged, the real politic that goes on there, that we're going to get there very quickly. It seems to me that we're leaving out the big elephant in the room, which is capital. Global capital, which is, as you just pointed out, divided radically now between China and the US and between the BRICS as well. I wonder if you could comment a little bit on, or maybe just push back at me. I don't think consensus building is going to happen. Capitalist interests, some of them, have a real strong desire to keep the system going. So I guess my real question for you is, what's blocking action in terms of moving towards a better capitalism? Because I don't think we're going to get out of this without a better capitalism.
Well, that is a difficult question. I half agree with you that the global capital is absolutely responsible for the current, let's call it, environmental crisis. But at the same time, We all know what the record has been in socialist communist countries in terms of the way they treat the environment. Capitalism in itself is, I think, difficult to disentangle with civilization. What if we say that it is the civilization's fault? It is how we constructed the civilization. Is it capitalism? Well, it is now, because that's what we have now. But would the alternative system create a better or stop environmental crisis? And I just frankly don't know. But I think what we need to be careful of is that there are no social experiments, there are no controlled experiments in social science, as you know. So we can't do an experiment, isolated experiment, isolating certain particular factors. But we also should be aware of a lot of processes, because the current economic system is such a complex system. I'm not sure if the ownership structure, which is ultimately what capitalism represents, is what is killing the environment. Of course, you know, if you think about the natural gas lobby and ExxonMobil and that they hid the environmental reality that they already are aware of, all those things are problematic. So I'll give you that. In terms of consensus, it's not possible. I don't know, because I'm not a practitioner. According to Clarence, he says it's already there. But the funding isn't. And that does worry me, because how much funding to actually buttress the climate priorities we have? So how much money have we spent? How much, what is the US defense budget right now? It's like 300 trillion or something. We have money for that, right? And we have no money for other things. No. So it is the societal priority we are setting, that certain things are more important than others, and we won't be able to balance, or the climate priorities are somehow needs to be done cheaply, or there's no enough funding associated with it. And that's the choice this system is making.
So you were asking what's standing in the way of this change, basically? Well, it's one thing is the fact that there was one quarter where Exxon made $44 billion. What's standing in the way is the fact that we built an economic system based on fossil fuels. We didn't do it on purpose. It just made a lot of sense at the time until it didn't. But what's standing in the way is money. I mean, we spend how much on pet food a year in this country? Billions of dollars. We spend more on pet food than we spend on sort of clean energy research and development. So what's standing in the way is our habits, inertia, and the fact that nobody's going to walk away from, and this is just a fact, nobody's going to walk away from a money-making enterprise. If you could make $40 billion in a quarter, you're going to have to pry people's hands off of this system. So that's what's standing in the way of it. And also, you know, I didn't fly out to Portland on a magic carpet. I flew out on a plane that runs on fossil fuels. So once again, it's inertia. And we all contribute to it. And we're not sitting here dastardly trying to do in the planet, but just the way we live is what stands in the way. So, and you can't, and this is like building, I equate the climate crusade, crisis, whatever you want to call it, to cathedral building in Europe. There are cathedrals in Europe that have taken 300 years to build. I don't think the climate crisis and resolving it is going to take 300 years, but this is a multi-generational, intergenerational project that we are starting on And so it took us time to get into this predicament, and it's going to take us hopefully less time to get out of it. But frankly, what's standing in the way is our habits. And I'm not blaming consumers, but it's just not easy to change the entire built infrastructure of planet Earth by 2030 or so. So, I mean, I'm cynical, but I'm a cynical optimist. So.
All right. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask your additional questions to move out to the cookie counter. Is this really a pressing, urgent question?
Oh, it's okay.
You okay? Okay, great. Great. We will now, well, hold on. I got some announcements of what else is coming in Symposium. Tomorrow, you may join a number of your colleagues. Let's make it open to everybody. Come and drop in. Fowler 350, 11:30 to 12:30. There'll be lunch snack foods. You don't have to stay the whole time. Come on in, join in the conversation, and then go on your merry way. Tomorrow evening, back here, same bat channel, same bat place, we'll have a panel discussion on the transition to renewable energy from 4 very different perspectives, and you will get to see our guest speakers again, as Yuko Aoyama will be moderating the discussion, and Clarence will provide some closing comments. So come back and enjoy different perspectives on how to work ourselves out of this muddy problem of a market-based system that is currently undergoing climate change. And finally, on Thursday, we will talk about the end of the capitalist linear system, which is waste. And the students have designed an interactive, hands-on, art-based activity so that you can have deep and meaningful conversations about the production and fate of waste while crafting. So you'll want to go to that, RSVP on the webpage, and I will see you out in the lobby with a snack. Thank you so much for coming.